off mute as you choose. I mean, obviously, if I present you with a really dazzling fact, it's always comforting to hear people go, ooh. So, right, so let's begin with the early music. So, what I'm saying about this is fairly sort of a light touch presentation. I'm not a scholar, I'm just a kind of an interested amateur, really. I'll be doing sort of, covering mainly the Middle Ages and Renaissance. There will be a bit further in the future, for more recent music, the odd occasion. This will be split into 3 parts in the purpose of this. So this lunchtime, is going to cover the Middle Ages. I'm planning to do the Renaissance again this time, same time next week. So I will send an invite out for that. And the following week will be the closing part, which will kind of cover bits in the 17th century and some instruments that have survived to this day. So, first of all, I assume you can see the slide deck as well, that's hopeful. Identifying the musical periods. So we've got the Middle Ages, which we're covering today, which is round about sort of 500 AD to around about 1450. Sometimes known as the Gothic era. That didn't mean that people went about looking like Marilyn Manson or Robert Smith or even that incredibly hot bass player from Sisters of Mercy. When they use the term Gothic, it's like when you think about Gothic novels and like Wuthering Heights and Dracula and things like that. Something was termed as Gothic usually because it wasn't the classical way of thinking, the current way of thinking. So, this would definitely not, because of the sort of, I suppose, how primitive it was in some ways, that it just wouldn't be considered classical. So it is historically known as the Gothic era. Didn't really have much to do with the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. It's just one of those terms. Renaissance, so this is around about 1400 to 1600. I say that because there seems to be different ideas of when Middle Ages ended and Renaissance started. Some say 1400, some say 1440 or 1450. I would always talk 1500, but I would probably just, for argument's sake, put it round about 1450. But everybody seems to be in agreement that the Renaissance finished at 1600. Then the Baroque period. This is 1600 to 1750. This is sort of this is your Vivaldis and your and the like. J.S. Bach, that type of thing. The classical period. Now, again, the actual classical period lasted just over 50 years, because I know people say classical music, but it's quite an umbrella term. So you're listening to Classic FM and they'll be playing music of the Baroque era, the actual classical period, and the period that came after, known as the Romantic period. This is obviously in the classical period, that's when your orchestra were all fully established and sussed out and everything. So by the Romantic period, this is where you started getting more symphonic poems, etc. Music that painted a picture rather than just changing your mood, etc. So that was 1800 to 1914. And then obviously we got modern classical and, the music to date. So, so again, Radio 3, Classic FM would be playing the modern classical, Romantic and classical and Baroque, and sometimes touch on Renaissance, but, it's generally under the umbrella term of classical. So, we're touching on the Middle Ages. Okay, this one, so we begin the Middle Ages. Like I say, was arguable about when it finished. So, in the Middle Ages, we didn't have scales, we had what we call modes, and they weren't, they were a primitive form of scales, but there's one of the things about it is it's just by modern intervals between notes would not be consistent. So, say for example, if you imagine playing on the C scale on all the white notes, which would be a normal major scale, that would be known as the Ionian mode, but you would never deviate from that gamut of notes. There would always be, you wouldn't have any sharps and flats before when you were changing chords. You would only use those particular notes. So say for example, if you did the same thing in F, all on the white notes, you get something quite different, and that's known as the Lydian mode. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this keyboard. Yeah, right, so say for example, this is the Ionian mode, so imagine doing Do a Dia. So yeah, that sounds all fine and dandy, but if you did the same thing in F, or the Lydian mode, you get this. Alright so far. So yeah, you get some interesting crossovers when you get more than one person or instrumentalist playing the same mode but in different parts, which we will come on to later. Okay, so the 6th to the 10th century, you had this form of music which was Gregorian chant, often known as plain song, just because of the simple reason it was plain. You might have a multitude of people singing, but they'll all be singing the same note. So in this case you've got many voices. And to be quite honest, even to this day, if you wanted to buy any of this, it'd be quite easy to get hold of, because a lot of people buy it to chill. So let me just now put you a nice example of Gregorian chant. What a lovely fade out. Okay, okay, moving along swiftly when I can get back to my slide deck. Now, the Saxon Liar. This is quite a versatile little instrument. It's just, as you can see, a sort of a 7-string harp-like instrument. But there's no specific tuning to this, so what you could do is play it like, tune the first few lower notes or lower strings to a drone, and then use the rest of it to play a little melody. Or you could just tune it to a natural sort of 7-note scale. So anyway, here's an example of the latter. Okay, yeah, so during the Crusades, around about sort of 10th century, etc., we basically nicked a lot of instruments from the East. So, yeah, lots of examples were brought back, such as, a very early form of lute known as the oud. We're not covering that at the moment, but yeah, so moving on to this, one of the instruments we nicked from sort of India was called the Shawn, not Shawn. This is a sort of woodwind instrument, and it's basically the ancestor to the modern oboe. It has a reed on the front, on the mouthpiece, and yeah, it's designated as an outdoor instrument because, well, basically it's quite a powerful ear-splitting instrument. Sorry, did somebody have a question?
No, I was just saying no.
Oh, okay, that's like, yeah, woo! You should all do that.
Giving you moral support.
That's it. That's great. That's great. Keep that up, especially when all this probably starts crashing. So here's the Shawn. I'll remember to do this next time, is actually put you back to the presentation so you can see a picture of it while you're listening. So, right, the bagpipes, these are not peculiar to any of us, of course. We know about the sort of surviving Scottish and Irish bagpipes, etc. But back in the day, or up until recent centuries, there used to be bagpipes all over England, and they actually varied slightly in configuration depending on what region you were in. So they came in all shapes and sizes, so they didn't all necessarily sound like the Scottish bagpipes, which are obviously quite powerful and ear-splitting. What you see on this picture here, you've obviously got the mouthpiece where you inflate the chamber. There's also a drone pipe. There's actually two drone pipes there as well, so they obviously just play a continual note, probably a first and a fifth. And then you've got the chanter, which again is similar to a small Shawn. So, but I've chosen a different sounding bagpipe. This is probably a more cylindrical bore in its shape because of the sort of the general sort of softer sound of these. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture. Okay, this one is kind of a similar instrument. It's known as a bladder pipe. Now, as you can see with this one, it just has a mouthpiece that you inflate a small chamber, which has obviously got the reed housed inside the actual pipe itself there. So, similar sort of thing, you will always get a continual note, even when you're changing position with your hands, so you get this sort of little bits of trilling in between notes, etc. This is also a good example of modes being played where you've got two bladder pipes playing along with each other, but how the notes are always the same distance apart, which doesn't sound, basically just sounds incorrect in modern, to the modern ear or to the modern scale. So yeah, this is quite a little pleasant noise. Now we're talking about polyphony. We've kind of covered that just that we had two instruments playing different to each other. Obviously, the most, in a way, if it weren't for the church, our music in the West probably wouldn't have developed as much as it did, because I think the most complex pieces, excuse me, were played and composed for the church. This is known as, this particular period here within the Middle Ages, around the 13th century, is known as Ars Antiqua. Again, probably historically named because it was the older of two ways of playing or singing. So now what you've got in this one, we've got a few vocals, if you like, vocal parts. A couple of them actually, there's one actually just singing a drone. It's almost like he's doing circular breathing because you can't actually tell when he's taking breath. So there's singing a drone, and then you've got another two parts. So you've got a lead part singing, well, obviously the melody, and somebody else above that doing a kind of descant, but they're actually singing the same thing. And again, it's the same intervals between notes. They also got the situation where at this point, it seems that the longer they drew out the notes, the more, or drew out the words, it meant more. It seemed to be more symbolic, say for singing Hallelujah over several bars, singing each syllable, drawing each syllable over several bars to give the word more meaning. So this is an example of Ars Antiqua polyphony. Okay, and then the next logical step obviously was 14th century onwards. This was using polyphony a bit more, being a bit more adventurous. This was known as Ars Nova, this particular period. So yeah, we've still got a few people singing, but this time we've got a bit more sort of variety. They're more intertwining. They're not drawing out words as long as what they were before. So this is a motet from around about that period. So yeah, again, it just sounds a lot more complicated because there's just more, well, it is more complicated, and it's giving the impression that there are a lot more parts than what there really are. Notice there's still that slight clash there when you've got the modes and sort of like multiple parts. It doesn't quite harmonise. Okay, we've gone on to musical instruments a bit more now. This is the sort of fluted wind instrument. This was known as the three-holed pipe or the tabba pipe because the drum, yeah, you'll have probably seen Morris dancers with these kind of instruments. It's kind of a one-man band situation. One hand you've got the drum over the shoulder, so that's just bashing the drum. And then the other hand holds the three-holed pipe, and it can cover quite a range because it's obviously you've got that with just one hand, and it's basically 3 levels of breath pressure to actually get all the different notes. So you might be able to tell that a little bit with the when it gets to the higher notes, etc. Okay, so continuing with the whistle wind pipe. This is the 6-hole pipe, so it's kind of it's like an early version of a flute. It's yeah, it's obviously got the 6 holes. We didn't really get keys on flutes until I think about the 20th century. And sorry.
It's a bit like a recorder.
Yes, it's a similar principle, definitely. Yeah. There were recorders knocking about in the Middle Ages, but yeah, there's certainly in the next sort of like the Renaissance, the recorders featured quite a lot, and in fact they were sometimes known as Renaissance flutes. But yeah, we'll definitely be covering that next week. So yeah, with this instrument, it's just basically it's a softer version of a modern flute. Okay, another whistled instrument, a bit more unusual this one. This is known as a gem's horn. As you can see, it's actually a goat's horn. It has a recorder-like sound, and the strange thing about it is the mouthpiece is actually at the wider end. You can probably just see a sort of whistle mouthpiece just there. So yeah, again, a gem's horn, again, similar sort of thing, sort of a soft recorder sound. Okay, right, I'm just aware of what time it is already. I didn't realise it would go that quick. So right, yeah, so we've already covered such as the reed instruments. So we've done reed instruments in the Shawn, the bagpipe and the bladder pipe. So now on to stringed instruments. Another one that we sort of nicked from the East is an instrument called a rebec, originally called a rebab from India. So it's a 3-string bowed instrument. Depending on what size you had, they'd usually, rather than a violin where you play it under your chin, the rebec would be played to the breast, or the breast, and the smaller, the larger ones would be played sort of vertically, sitting down. So yeah, just has quite a nasally tone to the rebec. It's not it's a straight sound. It's not as powerful as say a violin, etc. And there we go. Okay, another one. Now then, be careful how you say this. This is a sitall. Yeah, as you can see, it's sort of a guitar-like instrument, but it isn't the predecessor to the guitar. There was an instrument called a gittern, which might have been a closer resemblance to an early guitar. But this one, it has quite a thick neck, but it's basically what you've got. You've got the bottom strings or the lower strings are strummed as a drone, and so it's the top strings that you know, the top pitch strings that actually have the melody. So yeah, it is quite a little jolly little tune. Okay, just covering brass instruments now. I'll try and skip through it a bit quicker. Yeah, this is the slide trumpet. Obviously, before the days that they started having valves on trumpets, etc. This is kind of like a smaller version of, well, there used to be an instrument that was a predecessor to the trombone known as a sackbut. Yeah, so this is the similar sort of principle. Basically, you do slide to get the harmonics, etc. And again, it's like a sort of modern trumpet, but it just has a slightly softer tone. Okay, next instrument. This is an instrument quite unusual. It's called a cornet. It's not to be confused with a modern cornet. This did actually have a sort of brass-like mouthpiece and was played like a trumpet, but it was actually wooden, and the earlier ones were actually made of bone, and the larger ones sort of like played over your shoulder, the sort of with the horn going over your shoulder. It is an unusual instrument. It was rare that you actually saw them playing together. They usually joined some other group of instruments. And yeah, it does a slightly, I'd say, slightly haunting tone. So yeah, there's a few instruments that start on this excerpt, but it's basically the highest instrument that you'll hear. just trying to pause so we can get through it a bit quicker. Okay. Now, yeah, we're on to keyboard instruments now. This is an interesting instrument. It's the clavichord. Clavi usually is a French word for a keyboard played instrument, so you'll hear that lots in clavinet and clavinova, etc. The clavichord was kind of an early version of piano in the fact that it used a hammer action, but it wasn't a very sort of refined hammer action that twangs the hammer against the strings as a modern piano would, or a forte piano. So this one, yeah, the clavichord had a lot softer sound, and it's very sort of, it was rumoured that you could basically be playing one of those at the dead of night in the house and not wake anybody up. Okay, hurdy-gurdy. I think a lot of people might have come across these. Sometimes buskers play these. This is a kind of a mechanical violin, and yeah, it uses a wheel to rub against the strings. The left hand actually plays the keys that frets the notes. Usually a drone would be played, and obviously the notes would play the melody. So it's several strings being sort of vibrated together, as it were, and some of them actually had like a little hammer that would buzz against the drone that could be used for the additional rhythm. An earlier form of this was like a two-person instrument, and again, careful how I say this, known as an organistrum, and eventually developed into a one-person organistrum, and an earlier version of the hurdy-gurdy known as a symphony. This particular recording is a good example of where you're going to play your instrument, you've got to have it in a good environment. This sounds like an instrument that sounds like it's been played in quite a damp environment. I saw Doncaster Waits trying to play a hurdy-gurdy, and they were stood in front of a brook, and it weren't playing. So here we go, a rough sounding hurdy-gurdy. Yeah, definitely a bit ropey sounding there.
Because I think that use that.
I won't be surprised. Yeah. Okay, this one, we're on to still keyboard instrument, but this time it's a wind instrument rather than this is known as a portative organ. It's one of the earliest organs. The first ever organ was known as a water organ, which I'll cover later, probably next week. Basically portative means portable. You could play this on your knee. Your left hand would operate the bellows at the back, would pump the air, and then your right hand would play the notes. So here's a quick example of a portative organ, sometimes known as an organito as well. Sorry? No, I'm just trying to, because obviously I'm conscious of time, so I was, yeah, that's why, I've just stopped it. Okay, so.
No, I didn't hear it at all.
Oh, did you not? Oh, rats.
No.
Let me just try that again. We got so far through this presentation without having to do without any problems. Oh well. Could you hear it then?
No.
Oh,
I don't know if anyone else can hear it. It might just be me.
I can't hear it.
You can't hear it. Right. Let me just. We're near the end anyway. So what I'll do, I'll unshare my screen and then share it again, and then hopefully. So I mean, this is the sort of second to the last part anyway. So. Right. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Let's just try. I'll just try playing this again then. This is the second to the last excerpt anyway now. So. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Sorted. Right, that's just faded out that time. Okay, then we're going to close the Middle Ages now. So what I'll do, I'll just play this last excerpt for the Middle Ages, and yeah, just say if you've got any questions, etc. Now, I realise we've run over. I thought by splitting this into 3 it'd be half an hour ago, but obviously not. So I'm gonna set another meeting up for the Renaissance this time next week. And obviously, if you feel anybody else might be interested, then do forward it on. So, any questions before we close?
No, but thanks. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, good stuff.
It's really good.
Yeah, smashing.
Thank you.
That's great. No, that's great. So what I'll do, I'm going to play this last piece. Then this is just a great sort of strange brassy example that sort of summarises the Middle Ages. It's kind of a wonderful organised chaos of something that starts in one key and then finishes in another, but it wanders about the place quite a lot. So I'm guessing it'd be kind of trumpety like instruments and a cornet. But so I'll just play this and then I'll just close the call at the end. So thanks for your time.